Anybody, anywhere,
It's time to take command.
The Cardiac Commanders are the Clutch Commanders!
With former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen.
This pass caught by Paulsen, the tight end.
And from 106.7 The Fan, Grant Paulsen.
This is Take Command, Logan Paulsen, Grant Paulsen with you, and it is finally here, a Commanders game week. On Sunday, they've got the New York Giants coming to town to open the season. Logan, we've done it. The offseason is in the rear view. We have army crawled through the desert, and we have found water. Let's play football, bro.
Let's play football, man. It was funny, like today I kind of started doing my regular season film watching. So kind of going through the third downs for the Giants, what they do on first down, definitely personnel, kind of reviewing some of the stuff from last year. And I was like, man, this feels so weird to be doing this, but it's like riding a bike, man. We're back in it, talking ball, and everything feels like it's right with the world. You know what I mean?
The rhythms with the show today. So we're going to break down what could be some new wrinkles in the offense, how they could use Deebo Samuel. You know, what are some of the things they might run that we haven't seen a lot of. Want to get into some defensive changes they're making under Joe Whitt as well next segment. And then before we get out of here, you know, we'll do a deeper dive looking ahead into what lies ahead for Washington. The early stretch of this season, the first quarter is going to be massive. It is a very favorable first 4 games comparative to some of their other stretches. So they've got to put some hay in the barn. But Logan, I wanted to, based on something you just said, kind of double click, which was this idea of you watching the tape for this week 1 game. And I always wonder about this. So there's new coordinators in places in the league. There's new players all over the place for the Giants. You're going back to last year's tape to get tendencies. Are you watching preseason at all? Like, how do teams prepare for a club in week 1?
Yeah, I like to watch a little preseason because I feel like even though that's kind of day 1, day 2 install for the team, you kind of get a feel for the fabric of what they want to be offensively and defensively. So you see a lot of the things that the Giants did last year in the preseason game versus the Jets offensively. You see defensively kind of how they're thinking about using Abdul Carter. He's kind of an off-ball linebacker in some looks. He's on the ball in certain looks. He's in their sub-pass rushing situation. Basic coverage structures, I forget their defensive coordinator's name, and that'll be in the preview show, but, doesn't play a ton of man, plays a little bit of 4, plays a little bit of 6, plays a little 2. So for him, you're like, when is he throwing man in there? Like, what situations does he like it? And so, like, that's just kind of getting a feel for, like, what you're watching, how they're utilizing players. They've had a lot of people added, but, again, kind of gives you, like, the foundational element, and then you go back and kind of watch last year and say, oh, this is something they definitely could have been better with. This is something that they did well. Let's see if they add more of that, and just kind of look for those threads. And, what you find, honestly, is people don't change that much, offensively and defensively. There might be some wrinkles here and there. Offensively, we might be in more 12 personnel. Like we just feel like it's a better matchup for us than we've done in years past. But the offense is the same. Or defensively, hey, we want to be in more base this year, so we're going to try and find ways to keep Dexter Lawrence at the true nose spot, whatever it looks like. So I think it's just it's more of the same and you're trying to pick up on something that they might be doing a little bit different.
DC is Shane Bowen, who came over last year, was his first year from the Tennessee Titans. In fact, we saw the hiring process, and kind of embarrassingly, if you ask me, when he was interviewed by Brian Daboll on Hard Knocks, which was a one-and-done Hard Knocks, where we had the whole offseason of the Giants, and you had the calls with Saquon Barkley and the Joe Shane decision-making. And I think a lot of teams around the league looked at it and were like, yeah, we're not cool with doing that.
Well, dude, the other thing that gets me about Hard Knocks, anybody who's ever been affiliated with it, you have right of first refusal. So they
Correct.
Watched that clip and they were like, this makes us look real dope, which is crazy to me.
So that's funny that yes, theoretically that's how it worked. I just would say I have to assume that the off-season version, they had either less ability to cut things out, or they didn't know what they didn't know, or something wasn't the same. Like if you watch the training camp version now, and it's my favorite show of all time, right? I'll go back in the off season and watch the Bengals and Bills from like 10 years ago. Okay. Like this is, I live for Hard Knocks, but it has gotten less amazing because they cut so many of the really interesting things out that the teams don't want out there. But that was an all access, like literally we're seeing them debate players that they got, that they didn't get. It was unbelievable television. Not if you're the Giants or if you're Joe Shane. I mean, this completely changed the way people feel about you. But I just remember that process, and I'm not exaggerating. You can go back and watch. Brian Daboll goes to Joe Shane after he sits down with Bowen, who he hired as their DC. And Shane's like, what'd you think? And he's like, I really like this guy. He ranks 7th in yards and run. And he's like citing the stats he's citing are like yards per game in the run game the last 5 years. And I'm like, oh my God, what a stupid metric to like make as the basis for hiring this guy. Like, I was like, this is just everyone talks about the Saquon Barkley thing. I think that was the dumbest thing I saw. But I'm not even saying he's not a great defensive coordinator. I'm just saying, you imagine these 500 level conversations with your R&D department and, you know, like these deep, thorough interviews. And he's like, well, they were like 5th against the run one time. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Like, that's what it felt like to me. I was like, this is insane.
No, I'm with you, man. But I think that's the other thing is like when you talk to these coaches, sometimes they value different things, you know, head ball coach. And I actually like that hire a lot. I think Joe Shane's a really smart dude. I think he did a great job in Tennessee. When you look at that roster down there, when he was there, the fact that they did what they were able to do was really quite incredible, like really overperformed. And if I'm citing anything, it's that. Like when you watch the film, you see 11 guys who are just pouring their heart out for this guy. He knows how to motivate people. It is a funny statistic, especially in like the modern NFL landscape, which is so pass heavy, to be like, hey, you know what? This guy's great at stopping the run. I understand that's still important, right? But yeah, it's an interesting thing to choose to put on the internet about yourself.
This is kind of the point. And by the way, like, I have no problem with you caring about stopping the run. Yards per game is like stat number 96 that I would use. Like when I was 11, when I would get ready to go do picks on Channel 9 as a kid with a bowl cut, the first thing I would look at is like yards per game allowed in the run, yards per game running the football. That was in 2000, okay? That was 25 years ago. I would like the head coach of the New York Giants to not do it that way. But no. I think Bowen is very competent, and we'll talk more about his defense. This is a guy who came up and earned it, was a defensive assistant with the Texans, cut his teeth at Georgia Tech and Ohio State and Kennesaw State in college, finally got an OLB job with the Titans, and then coordinator there, and now coordinator with the Giants. I'm reminded every time we get to this point of the year when you're getting ready for a week 1 game of the one year where I covered, matter of fact, the team you were on, the 2012 Redskins on the beat, and the fact that I was at every practice. So I was embedded, right? So it was like 70-hour work weeks of being at anything you guys did, we had to be at. And I just remember feeling like I had such a good understanding of what they were going to be and look like. Schematically, I don't even mean like how good the team would be.
Right.
But this is Robert Griffin's rookie year. And sure enough, you guys come out against the New Orleans Saints and you run an offense we had not seen at any point, not in any of the preseason games, not in one single practice, where Robertson pistol and everything's bubble screens left and right for 2 drives. And then, you're operating with read option, where the whole year majored in that drift on the backside to Pierre Garçon. And it was just a bunch of stuff that we hadn't seen a lot of. And I always remind myself of that. We feel like we know what they want to be based on what we saw. But on that specific example, when did they like implement all of that stuff? And were they purposefully just hiding it from everyone? And then how different is that from the rest of your career? Like, is that something we could see where Cliff's got a bunch of stuff he's ready to roll out that we haven't seen?
Yeah, so I think this is a great talking point, actually, when it comes to offensive football. So, like, when you're doing, like, day 1, day 2, everyone talks about the install structure for teams. We've talked about on this show a ton. So it's like day 1 is like, hey, here's our quick game pass. Here's our favorite base run. And think about each day of install is the skeleton of your offense, right? It's the bones that hold everything up. The thing that animates the skeleton is the coach and the verbiage and how they get to different looks. And so what I mean by that is, the drift is a great example. So we were running, past 18 week was the call, or past 15 week, whatever it was. So tight zone out of I formation, downhill to that side. And so when we were running that, Kyle noticed that, hey, this dude over here, the strong side linebacker, because again, it's I right and we're running the ball to the left, is going to play really hard to fit the extra gap the fullback is creating on the left side of the formation. And so with that void there vacated by that will linebacker, why don't we just run a route right in behind it? And so then we just called it drift. And that became, so again, we had past 15 week in. That's like day 4 install for Kyle, right? And so the X drift was like, after watching a bunch of people on film and how they play weak, it's like, why don't we just run a drift there? And so then we run a drift there, and then we'd run a drift. Oh, we can run it to the strong side too. We can run it weak. We can run it with this seam. We can run it with this big out. And all of a sudden, it just kind of developed off of it. But the bone of that install was the pass protection, and then how the teams played off of it, right? And so I think like it was the same thing with the zone read. Like we put in zone read pretty early in that training camp. It was, I don't want, maybe day 5 or 6, maybe 7. So later on in the process, but then it was like, man, running zone read, there's this unblocked defender here because it's cover 3. Why don't we just bring a guy back? We call it Grizz. Bring a guy back and block him. So then we brought a guy back and blocked him, and it was like, okay, now we have hats for hats. And then it's like, well, now we can run a pass protection off of that, and it just kind of built off of that. But the zone read was the humerus of your arm, and then we just were able to kind of add all the ligaments and the muscles and the connective tissue off of it. And I think that's one thing that makes offensive coordinators good. And I've said this on this show before, and I said it on John Keim's show that I did earlier this week, is you have an idea of what the offense is. You have an idea of what you're good at. But then as you get into the season, teams respond differently to you. They present different looks. And all of a sudden you're like, this run isn't as good as we thought it was. Let's tweak it. Let's change it up. Let's prioritize this a little bit different. Let's prioritize this protection. Let's prioritize this route concept because this receiver is better at it. And all of a sudden the offense, which was still kind of following that day 1 to 12 install schedule, has morphed, but the skeleton of it is still the same.
What were some of the things last year that maybe at the beginning of the year wasn't a bread and butter or wasn't something they majored in, but you think they eventually got to that they really liked that could be prevalent early this year offensively?
Yeah, so I would say like the number one thing for me is like what I call spin. I don't know what they call it here, but it's basically like 2 ins, right? So think about it with like Zach Ertz in that number 2 spot, Terry McLaurin, whoever's on the perimeter, and they're both running digs. One's at 12 yards apparently, and one's at like 15. So you get 2 different levels. Like you get kind of 2 different windows there. Zach Ertz did a great job of that last year, and that became kind of their 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7 type of call, right?
And those 2 guys aren't too close together, bringing DBs to
they're
close
not
to
because
each
of how they spend. I think this is where spacing and stuff is so important, right? Like, because if you get too tight, then you're going to be stacked, right? But if we're at good spacing width, so like he's in the slot, but we're going to cheat in near the tackle a little bit. The receiver's going to cheat out a little bit. Then we got 2 levels. So if I run that first in and the hook player matches me, I've created a void for that second dig coming in right behind him. So that I think was one of the better plays that I saw later in the year. So again,
and is Daniels always reading the hook player then? Because either he's going to, jump on Ertz or lay off and Ertz is open.
So the read to me, because they were getting like a lot of man or like a lot of match, is like if Zach wins, throw him the ball. If Zach's covered because there's a hook player or someone's in that window, we're going to get to the second dig, and then there's a nice flat control, like either the back's chipping, running to the flat or whatever. And so I think that's something that you have there. Because again, if that hook player gets depth under that dig, hit the flat, right? And so it became this really, it's a simple play. Everybody runs it. I ran it with Kyle when I was in Washington, and they run it and they've just got really good at it. And that was something that I don't think they thought they'd be good at early in the year. And that became a kind of a staple, especially later in the second half of last season.
Hey, these are the types of things I want to dive into that I'm excited about seeing. Every year starts over, right? So they're going to begin with what they think they like. But in Cliff's offense, I mean, would you say from a number of plays, from a playbook standpoint, like this is complicated, this is heavy? Like where does he rank among some of the stuff you've seen?
That's the thing that's so hard to determine with Cliff when you watch his offense. Because obviously, like when I watch Kyle, when I watch Matt LaFleur, when I watch Mike McDaniels, when I watch Kyle Shanahan, I understand the skeleton. I understand the framework that they're operating in really, really well. I can identify plays. I'm like, that's a little different, but that's the bone of this play, right? With Cliff, like I understand general pass concepts because everyone kind of runs something similar. But the thing that makes him so hard, or makes the offense so hard to understand the level of complexity with, is they are able to get to multiple looks in a game, but they're also able to operate within those multiple looks in a hurry up context. So think about like West Coast offenses, right? So think about Kyle Shanahan, right? Long, wordy, very verbose play calls. And it's because it allows him to be the puppet master and get everybody in the right split, in the right formation, running all these different routes and running all these different spacings. And so you're kind of getting the perfect play on the field, at least as you want to call it. Cliff doesn't have, at least to my knowledge of where his background. So obviously the air raid doesn't have that same type of mechanism in terms of language. And you hear about people talk about coming from, just as an example of this, the air Coryell system, which is numbers, which is like 989, right? So it's go, post, go. The second you get out of numbers, you lose some dexterity in terms of calling route combinations, right? Because that's only 3 numbers, that's 9 routes. And when you look at the landscape of the NFL now, like you want to be able to tell, X go, Z out, whatever, and you lose some of that dexterity, which is a limitation there. So the thing that with Cliff is, to me, they are somewhat repetitive in terms of play call, but because of the hurry up, because of the flexibility of formation, because of how they disguise stuff, they get their complexity from other variables. So long story short is, to my eye, it looks like they have what I would say is probably hard to say, but I'd say between 5 and 8 runs in a game, which would be a low number for Kyle. And it seems to me like they have anywhere from 15 to 30 passes in a game, but it's hard for me to know whether those are individual calls or whether the calls change based on formation because of how quickly they're getting. So to me, like they're operating with such speed. I don't know how it is anything else. But again,
so, and I mentioned this on a previous pod, but they ran more a hurry-up offense, no huddle last year than any team since the Eagles under Chip Kelly, which you're going back over a half decade ago. The tempo with which they operated led the NFL last year. So, I mean, there's only so much I'd want to try to cram in terms of quantity if you're trying to move that quickly. And what people need to remember, too, I'm assuming when you talk about 5 or so runs, is when you can get to that run, one of the – I'm trying to think if it was the opening drive against the Bengals. There was a drive that got dissected last year where they ran – it was like the same run 3 or 4 times, but out of different formations and looks. And it's almost like a different play altogether at that point.
And so that's the thing, for Kyle, just as a point of comparison, because that's what I know, Kyle, anytime you're in a different formation, so let's say day 1 install for us is 18. That's outside zone to the right. And that's with 2 tight ends. That's out of solo, right? But the second I get to trips, we have to call that 18 support because the run target changes for the center, right? Let's say we do it with a fullback. Now we call it 18 force, or we call it 18 Zorro, or we call it 18 sift, right? And this
is all one run.
Those are all 1 runs, but the tags they change the run target. And as we change the run target, they become, in my mind, a new run. Does Cliff use the same nomenclature, or does he assume that when I call it out of trips, even though this is just 18, the center has to know that it's trips, I have to take the mic point 1 farther than I did before. And so those are the things that I think are really interesting about offensive verbiage and building an offense, quite frankly, right? And because I haven't played in this offense, and like you can get, sometimes I talk to people like that have played for them in the past, and they have little tidbits here and little tidbits there, and you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting, or that's one way to do it. I didn't think of that. But again, there's a lot of ways to do this, and there's a lot of ways to make it seem really complicated with the formation like you're talking about, but keep the volume really low. So that's the thing that I'm having a hard time with when I watch it, because I'm like, oh, like there was a game last year where I think it was the first Cowboys game where like you could feel the rhythm of the call. Oh, it wasn't them because they won the game. So they lost that Cowboys game, but it was a game they won where it was like, if they were in this formation, it was this play. If it was in this formation with this split, it was this play. But because they were going so fast, the opponent didn't have any idea what was going on. Right. So like, even though it was simple, the speed with which they operated made it really complex. So again, it appears more simple than a Kyle offense, but Kyle is on a spectrum, is really complicated. It feels like to me it's kind of right in the middle, and it works because of the speed and the dexterity that he has and they have at the line of scrimmage.
So I want to sink our teeth into some specifics on ways that things could change schematically this year with Deebo Samuel and some of the other personnel adjustments that they've made, particularly up front, getting a little more athletic at tackle if Connerly's out there. And we'll do that next on Take Command. He's Logan Paulsen. I'm Grant Paulsen. Take Command. We are available wherever you get your audio. Please subscribe, rate, review, leave comments on the pod, do all of that podcasty stuff. Of course, you can watch us on YouTube in high definition as well. Handsome Logan and myself on the 106.7 The Fan and Team 980 YouTubes. All right, Logan, I want to get into Deebo Samuel's insertion into the offense. We only saw him get the football once in the preseason among a couple of snaps, literally, that he was out there for. I don't think it's a coincidence, though. The dress rehearsal, the first play against Cincinnati, the one time they kind of game planned any looks, the first play was a jet action end around to Deebo Samuel. I'm just excited to see what they do with him. When you go back and study, his usage, what do you think they're going to try to get done with Deebo early this season?
Yeah, so this could be a long answer because there's levels to this, right? It's like, how do you want to, like, what does he do for you? I think that's the crux of the question. And for me, what Deebo does better maybe than any player in the NFL at the moment is he creates favorable matchups. And so what I mean by that is I can trot out, let's say, 12 personnel, right? And Deebo's in. Deebo's like a receiver, right? And so it might feel like that's 12 personnel, and I have to match that with 12 personnel because he can play outside the numbers receiver. I've got, let's say whoever Jennings in San Francisco, he's playing receiver. We got Kittle, we got Juszczyk in, and we've got another running back in, right? And all of a sudden I can motion him to the backfield, and now we're in 22 personnel. And so I've matched you in 12 personnel, which means I'm probably a nickel personnel, like I'm matching you with smaller personnel defensively. And now all of a sudden I'm in a big personnel to run the football just because of what he's able to do as a ball carrier and on the perimeter. Let's say we go in the reverse. Let's say, Deebo's in the game. It's short yardage situation. We're in 12 personnel. And all of a sudden, like, he's the back in that personnel. So we have 3 wide receivers and he's lines up in the backfield. I'm going to match you defensively with a linebacker. Now I just motion you to the slot, and all of a sudden we have our number 1 receiver drawing the matchup of a terrible coverage player. Most linebackers can't cover a number 1 wide receiver. So if I'm Cliff, like, that's the flexibility he gives you, is basically saying, how defensively do we match personnel with a player who can line up outside the numbers and kill us, but is also a very dexterous ball carrier as a runner? And obviously the interesting question is where does that dial actually fall? Are you turning it up to 11? Is he playing running back, 35% of the snaps? I don't know if they're going to go that high, but that's the type of flexibility that he gives you in terms of drawing a matchup. There was a play that I watched from 2024, so last year, where they line him up as a running back. He gets a matchup with a linebacker. They run a shallow cross by the number 1 receiver, and he just runs a wide and go from the backfield, and he's drawing a linebacker, and he just runs right by him, catches it for an explosive play. Like, you're not going to find an easier way to draw favorable matchups with personnel. And then you've got him, you've got guys like Zach Ertz, you've got guys like Austin Eckler. And I think that's really the way offensive football is transitioning, is finding guys that can dictate personnel, dictate matchups, and then win those matchups once they've been dictated.
Among wide receivers last year, 42 carries led the NFL, which shouldn't surprise anybody for Deebo Samuel. To your point, he had his own position name, wide back, they started calling him, right? The wide running back. But I'm curious. I thought in camp we didn't see nearly as much of the San Francisco Deebo Samuel stuff that I think we're going to see a lot of in the regular season. He just lined up and played receiver a lot, and I thought he looked really good. And if you go back to 2023, so this has been a couple of seasons now, but he did a lot of that in San Francisco. I mean, his all-pro year in 21, he averaged 18 yards a catch, had 77 grabs for 1,400 yards. He was running a lot of those like Kyle Shanahan vintage dig routes, middle of the field, play action pop stuff, and he did it very effectively. Now, there's questions about what he is now compared to then at 29 years old, but I'm excited to see it because he has proven that he can play the wide receiver position traditionally, as well as be the versatile Swiss Army knife that they brought him in here to be, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think when you look at what he does well, like, I don't know if this is how Kyle used him, but he ran the hell out of a dig. Whether that's the
I love him doing that because he boxes guys out. He's got the size and the physicality. He can make a contested catch between the hashes. Like, he's been so good at that in his career.
Yeah, run the hell out of a deep dig. We're talking that kind of 18 to 20 yard dig. He runs a drift really nice. He runs that slot kind of 12 to 14 yard dig. And it was interesting kind of watching the film as I went back to 2021 where he had like that really productive year and he had all those carries and explosive runs and explosive receptions and really went bonkers. And I was like, a lot of this seems to cross over maybe with what Zach Ertz does, right? He runs a little bit of choice from the slot. He runs the spin concept, right? He runs kind of that box fade, right? And so I think when you get all of those elements, you just say, okay, like in terms of skill set, everyone says he's not a true wide receiver. If you have him running a route tree that works for him, yeah, he's a true wide receiver. But I don't know if I feel like I'm not getting the most out of him if I put him out there and say, hey, just play Z, right? I want him in the slot. I want him on a nickel. I want him boxing people out. Like you said, I want him using his big frame to run a choice, to run a under, like run like an old chair concept. So corner by number 3, under 5-yard under by number 2, catch that ball against Philadelphia in 2023, caught one, and it looked like just a benign first down, right? Like no big deal. He ends up breaking the tackle of the nickel player, runs through the safety's face, and scores a 45-yard touchdown. Like that's what he gives you, right? It's like this ability to, once I'm in space and I've got some separation, like I'm a tough tackle. And I think you saw that in the preseason with the run. I think you see it on every year of his film, that I've watched going back to 2021.
Yeah, he was in the slot last year over 60% of the time as I look it up right now. About 680 snaps, 424, out. I should say out wide at over 60% of his snaps. And the slot was less than that. But it's funny. I'm looking at the game by game where they lined him up. And it's pretty clearly to me that they either had packages they liked or matchups they liked. So in week 1 and in week 16 last year, he had double-digit snaps in the backfield. But then there are also games where it's 3, 4, 1 snap in the backfield with 19 in the slot and 35 out wide. Week 14, he's back to 5 in the backfield, 10 in the slot, 33 out wide. There's not really a rhyme or reason. And with him, I'd have to dig deeper. Maybe he was banged up, and so that there's some usage concern or difference there. But it seems to me like there is this chameleon element here where 1 week he's in the backfield on 10 snaps, and the next it might be 2. And the slot is kind of undulating as well. It's everywhere from 9 to 20 snaps, right? So I kind of love that portable. It's kind of what you're talking about, right? It's you just don't know how they're going to use him until he lines up.
Yeah, correct. And I think if I remember correctly, some of the increased snap numbers were because they had injuries at running back positions, so they needed someone to come in and fill that role. And I think when you look at that Kyle offense, one of the things that stuck out to me after watching Deebo's film was just how reliant they are on having an explosive playmaker at the running back position. And again, it goes back to that matchup thing we were talking about. Like if Christian McCaffrey's hurt, Deebo Samuel can come in and he can run some of those choices, those slants, and beat linebackers one-on-one, beat a safety one-on-one. And defensively, you have to kind of cultivate your coverage structure where he has to be treated as a running back. Because again, you go back and watch some of that stuff and you're like, man, like this is a running back run. This is a trap. This is a wham. This is an inside the tackle run. And he's busting it for 20 yards. And so that's a very unique skill set. You can get guys, receivers that can play in the backfield and attack the perimeter, run an outside zone, run a toss crack, which Deebo's excellent at. But the idea that you can get somebody and have him play true running back, I don't know how much he wants to be doing that, but it does give a lot of flexibility and dexterity to the offense. And we talked about Cliff and like how many plays is he carrying? What's he doing? Think about just taking Deebo, putting him in the backfield, and all of a sudden that wham that Chris Rodriguez ran is now way more problematic because how do you match up with the personnel? And it gives it a new look. And also, if you hit the wham that cleanly in terms of blocking service, as much as C-Rod has gotten faster, I would imagine Deebo's taking that to the house for a touchdown.
Logan and Grant Paulsen on Take Command. We're just diving into Washington's offense and some things. You were bringing up 21, so I just looked that up. It's got me thinking about something. Another fascinating thing, when we're all coaching and pretending to be OCs and play callers from our couch, that we don't really think about that much is like, at least in my mind, I'm going, okay, how do I get to the sticks on this play? How do I get a first down? How do I score a touchdown on this drive? Whereas there is also a 10,000-foot view that these coaches need over the course of a season to get where they need to go. And what I mean by that is, in the case of a Deebo, like you can't just have an awesome September with him if it means you're running him into the ground. I bring this up because in 2021, the year we talked about, he had a total of 7 plays that he was in the backfield for going into week 10. From week 17, the final week, through 4 playoff games, or I should say 2 regular season games and 3 playoff games through the conference championship, he's in the backfield for 10, 15, 13, 12, and 11 plays. Yeah. So, I mean, you start to really, okay, what do we do best? Now, there's no saving anybody. Like, this is a semifinal of the conference. This is a conference championship game. So I wonder how, if you're Cliff, you got to add, subtract, you got to hit the gas pedal, hit the brakes too. That's part of this thing that we don't think about when we're going, it's 3rd and 4, let's go get 5.
Yeah, and I think it's, to me, with him and his skill set, he's one of those players where you almost want to give him the ball every play because of how physical he is. But also, it's a great point. It's something, like coach high school football. It's something that you're always having to consider with some of your better football players. You want to give them the ball all the time, but they got to play. You need them for the playoff push, right? So like you're kind of constantly doing a pitch count. I feel like Deebo falls into that that bucket really, really well because again, like when you watch him, man, it's like, man, for a receiver, he is insanely physical. Like he runs so hard.
Violent. Yeah.
And you're like, this is not sustainable for the whole year. So you got to be, I think he just got that dog in him, like that meme with the x-ray and it's the pit bull in there or whatever.
Right.
And you can't you can't say, hey, Deebo, like take it easy. It's week 4. It's like he's going to hit it as 100 miles an hour. So you got to be really selective about your touches. And I think in this offense, the other thing I'd point out too is, think about, just as an example, like think about they were running a lot of like Wanda, like with the zone read, like pre-snap in the preseason where they've got like that little bubble to the perimeter. Like, I don't care. Like if Deebo's running that bubble, like that's a 15-yard gain on some of that stuff. Like he's going to break a tackle. He's going to fall forward. We're going to get the first down. And even though like he's not in the backfield, he's affecting the composition of this offense and the productivity and the efficiency of the offense just by being involved in stuff like that. Think about like Terry last year versus Pittsburgh, where he runs that little RPO slant and takes it to the house. Like you've just added another piece that can bring that dynamism to the offense. So like I think people say, oh, it's from the backfield, he'll be this. From the backfield, he'll be this. Like I love him, the idea of him on some of these pre-snap, like just like count looks. You know what I'm saying? Oh, it's 2 over 3. Let's throw it out there real quick. Like think about Terry against Detroit. Like that's great, and that's gonna read like a run in terms of stat tracking for this offense, which is awesome. Like if I should rephrase that. If I'm the OC, I'm tracking those explosive plays from the receivers as runs. So I just think like that's the stuff that you want to think. Oh, how much backfield usage is he going to have? Like no, like this offense uses receivers like that anyway, but in a different kind of light, and they find ways to get them in space. And him in space is the ultimate thing I'm trying to get to.
So there aren't a whole lot of other new faces in terms of weaponry that I think we can really look at in terms of offensive changes. I want to bring up Jalen Lane in a moment, but one thing I've been thinking about is the offensive line. So Josh Connerly at right tackle and the athleticism and the ability to move that he provides. I texted a buddy of mine who's a coach in the league after that pick, who I know, their team was looking at some tackles as well. And he's like, I love that for them. Like fit wise, he's going to be awesome in their screen game. And I just wonder, like, if you've seen that so far based on what you've watched. And then also Brandon Coleman going to guard. I mean, do either of those personnel moves where now you've got a new left guard, ideally, probably a better left guard, and then a new right tackle, if Connerly's the guy every down from week 1 on, what could change based on the added athleticism there?
I mean, I think everyone wants to point to the screen game right away, which I think is smart. I think that's something it does give you. But the thing that I think about all the time with athletic offensive linemen is pin pull, perimeter, crack toss stuff. And so I thought of it actually when I was watching Deebo and his most effective runs from 2021. Think about crack toss as like, I'm a tight end. I'm in a 2-point stance. I crack the defensive end. The tackle pulls to the perimeter. He blocks the corner, kind of create this nice alley because then the guard pulls in behind or the center pulls in behind and is leading up on the safety. So we're able to create like a wall for the back to read. And I look at Tunsil. I look at Coleman. I look at Connerly. I look at Wiley. That's a sneaky one there. And Biotish. And ultimately Cosme when he gets healthy. And that's the one that I think is maybe being slept on or slightly underrated is they ran a lot of pin pull anyway, but more like downhill kind of what I would classify as like mid-zone pin pull stuff. And now I think with, some of these weapons, you're talking about Deebo, you're talking about Austin Eckler, you're talking about Bill Krosky-Merritt and the offensive line, the ability to get those big dudes out in space and block. Like I was doing something for Command Center and went back and watched all of Connerly's plays from the preseason. And was kind of like blown away by the athleticism that I saw. Like he's not this player, but like you're always comparing people to the best, which is unfair to them. But like Trent Williams and his ability to move in space, like there was shades of that kind of basketball player ability to sink your hips, make contact at the second level on some of these screens. Like they ran a screen versus New England, And that corner didn't stand a chance, man. Like, he just got out there before the ball was even thrown. And it's very hard to find people like that. So I think screens, perimeter runs, crack tosses, anytime you're pulling the tackle, like, it's even on like tackle trap stuff, like that Baltimore got a lot of miles out of a couple years ago. And I think about, if I have Jaden Daniels, who do I want to compare him to? It's probably Lamar as a runner. And they got a lot of miles out of like reading that backside end. He's coming down. He crashes following the tackle. I can pull it. We've got an RPO set up to the perimeter. So it just gives you a lot of movable chess pieces that can get to spots, which is weird to talk about with offensive linemen because you usually say that for receivers. But I think that's what it gives you. More dexterity in the run game, kind of number one, first and foremost.
All right, then real quick, and we can be shorter on this one, but Jalen Lane, do you see a role for him early on with his straight line speed? Because, the idea, I think, is he's kind of Deebo too. If Deebo's healthy and on the field, do they actually have anything for him in the early going here, do you think?
I think that'll be really interesting because in your mind, what is he? He's the fourth, fifth wide receiver, and depending on yeah. And so to me, you don't like game plan touches for your fourth guy or your fifth guy. I do think as the season goes, like, will his role potentially expand? Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. I do think early in the season, you're probably looking at something very akin to De'Ami Brown early last year, where it's like, I'm the big kind of vertical speed guy running these deep posts. Like, you feel my juice into the defense, and we're creating throwing windows underneath. And then obviously, like, there's the bubble stuff that De'Ami did so well with, the screen stuff that happened last year. And so at some point, does that start to grow for him? I would say, yeah. Like, and then if he does well with it, that package will start to grow and he'll get more opportunity. But I think it's definitely going to be a slow roll to start.
All right, next, let's get into the defensive side of the ball. And, not only some things they're going to try to do up front, where they're going to put as many D linemen out there in the situations where they can thrive as possible, but also on the back end, better corner play. What will that do for the play caller, Joe Whitt Jr.? That's next. He's Logan. I'm Grant. This is Take Command. Take Command, welcoming you back with Logan. I'm Grant. We appreciate everybody kicking it with us. Little road ahead here. So Thursday, we will have a game preview. We'll do that every single week, all season long. So Logan's going to break the Giants down on both sides of the ball and put together, a game plan on how to attack them. It's a really, really good listen. So make sure every Thursday you come here for that. And then Sunday after games, we will get you a live reaction pod as well. So make sure Sunday afternoon will be from the stadium that you can get to your computers and watch that. So we'll give you 3 episodes of Take Command a week, every week, all season long, starting with this week 1 that we're fired up about. But Logan, without further ado, let's get to the defensive side of the ball, man. And let's talk about the defensive front. So I've used the comp of the bullpen. Okay. This is kind of how I'm viewing this. In a major league bullpen, everyone's got a different role. My lefty who gets a lefty, my setup man who's a righty who throws a changeup. So we like him in these matchups, whatever that looks like. They've got a plan here with someone like Jacob Martin deep in their rotation where they're going to use him in scenarios where he can thrive. They're going to look for Von Miller to close. They're going to put Dietrich Wise out there on running downs with a guy like Javon Kinlaw. How do you mix and match and make this work, though? Because it sounds great on paper. This is a really tough coaching job for them, I think, to land this plane in a way where everyone can go out there and be at max capacity.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's interesting about this is I think people are like, oh, you mentioned the specialty pitchers, right? And I'm not a huge baseball guy. Like, surprise, surprise, I spend all my time talking about football. But I think there's something to just a guy that's going to have like a consistently low ERA. It doesn't need to be 0 necessarily. It doesn't need to be closing numbers, but just like consistent, like you can trust what you're going to get from this group. And so on first down, my analogy is going to be that consistent player. And so when I look at Dietrich Wise, when I look at Dorrance Armstrong, when I look at Daron Payne, especially in the second half of last year, I saw guys that understood how to be consistent on first down. And not everybody in the front at the time understood how to do that exactly. And so why I bring that up is, I think I said this on the last show, and we made a clip for social or whatever, but like, I think about when you're able to set edges, when you're able to fit your gaps, when you're able to cover the linebackers up, and you're just able to be where you're supposed to be, get the ball placement as a pitcher where it's supposed to be, the defense functions. And I think that is what you're doing, is you're just saying, hey, we're losing some of the defensive explosive plays, but at least we can be consistent in terms of making sure our middle linebackers, Frankie and Bobby, can have running lanes to the football, and they know the run, like they know where the fits are going to be. Last year, I felt like there were times where Bobby was having to kind of overreach and kind of be like, I need to be in two gaps at once. I'm trying to play the front side B, get back to the backside A, and that's just bad ball. That's just tough because I can't trust that this player is going to squeeze this gap after the pull. And so I think that's what I would say with that front group is Dietrich is incredibly consistent. Duran improved and is explosive. And I think Dorrance understands how to set a nice vertical edge. So think about that. We're just going to box it in. Kinlaw is going to be explosive. Hopefully he can beat some double teams and get some vertical penetration, which he showed in that Cincinnati game. And then let those linebackers run. So to me, it's not so much about like who's going to be the explosive playmaker. It's like who's just going to not screw this up in the front so that we can make sure the back end fits are correct.
And then how about passing downs and generating pass rush? Do you think this is schemed up? It sounded like last week you didn't quite buy what I was selling. I believe ultimately there's going to be something for Frankie Louvu coming off the edge where they're going to need to tap into his stellar pass rushing. I think is the best pass rusher on the team. Maybe we'll see. Maybe Von Miller takes that mantle this year in the fourth quarter of games as he puts games away. But like, where do you see the pressure coming from? And do you think they've just got the horses to let them line up and go, or do you think it is going to be schemed up by Whitt and Quinn?
I mean, I kind of getting ready for this Giants game. I'm looking back to last year, and I'm like, man, your pitch last year with your 5-man pressures were so good. Like, and even like the simulated like zone pressure stuff where you got Bobby and Frankie up in the A gap and then they drop the ends out or drop one of the ends out. Like that stuff is so good. Like, why get away from it? And maybe you do feel like you can win with 4, but I think like one of the things that getting better on the perimeter allows you to do is just be more aggressive in coverage and then be more aggressive with the rush. And I'm not saying all the time, but I do think they'll use Frankie on the perimeter as an edge rusher. I also think they'll line up in the middle. I think they can do more. I think when you talk about what makes this group in the pass rush, we talk about consistency, right? With the first and second down group of guys, like who can just be consistent and be where they're supposed to be. Pass, right? Now we're talking about who can bring variance, who can win one-on-ones, who can find the explosive play. And so it's a different paradigm in this context on third down. So yeah, Von Miller, Dorrance over the guard, I think Frankie over the opposite end, Duran, Kinlaw in there, whatever that looks like. I think that's going to be the fun schematic element to watch, is because you got guys with flexibility. How now do you deploy them to create consternation for the offense?
Well, and as a guy who made your money, mostly blocking as a tight end, right? I mean, what does that do? Let's talk about that. Like when Luvu's occasionally lined up as a Mike linebacker, but sometimes he's standing on the edge, and now he's, mugging in the A gap. Or you referenced Dorrance Armstrong being able to be in, like, if they're, it's not NASCAR or something where there's this package where everyone's standing up, but if they have a bunch of guys that are constantly moving around, I mean, you can't major in that, but like, what does that do for you? Just trying to identify what your responsibility is.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is tough about pass protection. Like that was one of the more stressful days. It's such a small portion of what you're doing, because like you want to stay out of third and long, right? Where you kind of see all these exotic looks, and every team's a little different, but like 3rd and 8 to 3rd and 12, let's say hypothetically, because that's where you see the exotic blitz packages, right? You see the exotic formations. You need to spend so much time on IDing. And so anything I can do as a defensive coordinator to disrupt the identification of the offense is an advantage for me, because ultimately, like, they might screw it up. They might say, oh, okay, on this down, Frankie's a big, right? We're going to fan to Frankie, but it's actually, this is 2nd and 10. We don't do that till 3rd and 10. And now we've fanned to this protection, and Bobby Wagner runs right up the middle and sacks the quarterback. Like, that's the type of stuff that this gives you. It's just basically saying, like, we have so much flexibility. We can move these pieces around the board. They all kind of do and are interchangeable for our defensive scheme, but for the offense, it's kind of, it goes back to the Cliff thing. It's the illusion of complexity. We're running the same patterns, we're running the same stunts, we just move bodies around. And I'll tell you, as a guy who had to stand back there and was like the 3rd down protection guy for a couple of years, I'm sweating bullets, because you're like, is that what number is that? Is that the right guy? What did the quarterback say? It's the play clock's working down. They're rotating the other way. You're like, oh shoot. And all of that has to happen in 30 seconds. So anything I can do to make that a little bit muddy, that's a win. I think Joe Whitt Jr., and we saw some of that in the preseason, which was exciting.
So you mentioned 3rd and 8 to 3rd and 12, which makes a lot of sense, is when coordinators can kind of let their hair down and have a little fun. What's the opposite of that, where it's the most vanilla in terms of down and like when are you like, okay, we did our part and now we get to not have to worry about that for a down?
You talking about for the offense, you're saying?
Yeah. Like if 3rd and 8 and to 3rd and 12 is swimming with sharks and there's some chum in the water, like
second
when is
4, second and you know what I'm saying?
So that's when we talk about being ahead of the sticks and having your whole play sheet.
Yeah.
You got a 6-yard run or you hit a little pass for 6, and now it's 2nd and 4, and you got a lot less to worry about.
Yeah, there's certain coordinators you got to know them, like like Wink Martindale, for example. Like he'd get a little spicy after a 6-yard run and be like, forget it, just cover 0. And so you have to know that was like his personality.
Todd Bowles, there's probably no rules. He's just every down he's blitzing.
Yeah, right.
Highest blitz rate in the league last year. Him and Flores.
That's a great example, right? Because Flores is a great example. Like they have taken this disruptive element to like the 12th level, right? They're like, well, screw it. We don't want the offense ever to be comfortable. And do we expose ourselves to more risk? Yeah, absolutely. But it's so disruptive. We're counting on turnovers. We're counting on negative plays like sacks, tackle for losses, whatever, to offset some of that statistical variance. So obviously very successful for Minnesota, less successful for Tampa Bay. But I think the principle is still there.
All right, one more as we X and O a little bit on what could look different maybe for Washington, things they'd like to get to more often on both sides of the ball. How about Joe Whitt as a play caller and the flexibility, the versatility that's provided if they can run as much man as they want to? That was, to me, the biggest revelation I had coming out to camp right away over a few days was like, wow, they're running a ton of man coverage. And by the way, it looked good. Like they now, was it who they're defending? I don't know. But like that was my first takeaway of a couple of days of training camp was like the corners are way better and they trust them a lot more to play man. I don't know if that was a camp thing or if that's going to carry over, but let's just say for the sake of this discussion that they run a lot more man this year and that their corners are way better, which it looks like they are. Now let's talk about, if you're Joe Whitt, what that means for you.
Yeah, so I think obviously what we saw in training camp is totally in line with what you're saying. But then you go back and you watch, the first 10 plays of the Cincinnati game, and there is more man than last year, right? But they get to it and they disguise it in different ways. So even though they had a higher percentage of man last year than I feel like at any time, in the Cincinnati game than at any time last year, where they were like, they still, hey, here's a little cover 3, here's a little quarters, here's a little fire zone, right? And so I think the thing is like, going back to the pitching analogy, their fastball, they want to be a man coverage, like come after us, like beat your chest, like we're a competitive, tough football team, which is really
the way we live is not for everybody.
Right. Exactly right.
Arrive violently.
And I respect that because
I'm in on that.
It coincides, right? It works, right? And so you look at what they did in Dallas, talking about Dan, he wants to be in man. He wants to dictate to the offense, which I respect. And now they can do that. And now as a hitter, you're like, well, shoot, we got to make sure we can hit the fastball. But they got this sick changeup, which is this cover 2 invert that really messes with our rules from a route combination standpoint if we don't ID it correctly. Or, hey, they're in this bare front. Everyone's in the line of scrimmage. It looks like they've got all this run support up here, and they're actually in man now. And that was totally a surprise, and it works because now they're dogging our tight end that stays in there because like he's in pass protection. So I think it's just the thing that I'm most excited about. There will be more man coverage this year, but it's the change-ups off of it because that's when you get the ball production. That's when you get the sacks. That's when you get the TFL. And you saw shades of what that could be in those 10 plays of Cincinnati. And I thought they did a really good job against a really good receiving core of being disruptive and confusing and fast and aggressive in a way that standing on the sideline of that game that I had never felt last year. And they played hard last year, don't get me wrong, but the confidence that they had. So it kind of allows that whole picture, in my opinion, to come together in a nice way. Confident, aggressive, downhill. The way we play is not for everybody. I think that's how it felt in those 10 plays against Cincinnati.
Logie, you were breaking down the changeup there. Are you sure you're not a baseball guy? We were like 5 seconds in that answer away from you talking about the Paulsen splinker. I thought you were about to go supination versus pronation.
I know that from working out, right? pronation,
Okay.
supination. I know that from
Right.
working out.
But that's the new big thing in baseball, right? The pronation is like when you throw the pitch, you shoot the gun. But the supination, this guy I was talking to yesterday in the minor leagues for my prospect show is like, I'm a big supinator, so he releases the ball going the other way, right?
Right.
So it's almost like when you throw like the circle change where you're pulling down the curtain
circle
or
change.
something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, circle change, right?
Yeah, you got it. The supination and the pronate and the supinate and the pronate. Absolutely. All right. Well, we can't get here soon enough. I mean, we are waiting, and I know you guys are fired up as well. Week 1 is here. So the next time you hear from us on Take Command, our game preview, it's a very, very good listen. When Craig was hanging out with Logan last year, it was always a staple for me getting ready for the game. So that's coming up in just a couple of days, and then we will be live at the stadium giving you a pod that you'll have and video. If you don't get it on game night, that's fine. Monday, it'll be in your feed. So make sure you subscribe, rate, review, video on the YouTubes for 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980, and of course, wherever you get your audio. For Logan Paulsen and our producer, Evan, I'm Grant saying so long. Thanks for hanging out. We'll be back at it in just a couple of days. It is game week.